This is episode 35 with Craichy. Welcome to My Kid Cures Cancer. My name is Ryan Sternagel, former regular guy turned dadcologist, cancer coach, and health advocate. Each week we'll talk to a new expert on a particular aspect of beating cancer or human optimization to bring you one step closer on your path to true health. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Now let's dive into this valuable, life-saving information which you're not going to hear about in a mainstream hospital. Just how is it exactly that food can stop cancer? We're going to hear all about it from Craichy, who is a leading health advocate, author, and speaker who frequently appears on radio and television programs nationwide. More importantly, he's a devoted husband and father who has come to be an authority in natural health and nutrition. Craichy is the founder and CEO of Living Fuel, Inc., a leading distributor of superfood nutrition, the author of the best-selling book, Super Health, The 7 Golden Keys to Unlocking Lifelong Vitality, and his most recent book, The Super Health Diet, The Last Diet You Will Ever Need. Through his work, products, and teaching, Craichy is on a mission to change lives. And the interview you are about to hear with Craichy was really neat. Like I told him, we've certainly come at cancer from quite a few directions and talked about a lot of different natural approaches on this show, but we haven't done an episode dedicated to just how helpful super nutrition as an anti-cancer measure can be and exactly what is going on in the body from that perspective when you put in the good stuff. So when I saw him speak on just this topic at the Truth About Cancer Live event recently, I knew I had to get him on the show, and I think you guys are really going to like it. And that wasn't even all we talked about. Craichy is a wealth of knowledge on optimizing health in general, which stemmed from him figuring out how to reverse chronic depression in his wife. Craichy talked about his 7 golden keys to health, which play a huge role in preventing and reversing just about every disease imaginable, and how in many ways cancer can be thought of as a lifestyle problem, not a cancer problem. We got into a favorite recurring topic on this show, sugar and cancer, both Craichy's thoughts on whole food sugars from fruit, and a really good explanation of things like glycemic response and glycemic load, which can serve as a little more helpful tools to evaluate these things than just asking whether any food with sugar in it whatsoever is a good thing or a bad thing. Craichy also delved into a very interesting story about the sugar industry itself being well aware of their link to cancer and the shenanigans they've been pulling for a long time to keep the public unaware of it. Craichy talked about the 4 primary processes in cancer to be dealt with and how food can play a role in preventing each, and he explained his 4 corners of superfood nutrition to give us an idea of exactly how to start achieving these things in our own health journeys. This was a very enlightening episode, so I really hope you guys stick around for it. As always, we're very glad you stopped by My Kid Cures Cancer. It's our goal here to bring all sides of the discussion on how to heal cancer and be truly healthy to the same table to give you one place to tune into for the most well-rounded perspective possible. This is a show for people going through cancer, by people going through cancer, inspired by my wife Teddy and I's experience with childhood cancer, bringing our son Ryder back from a stage 4 cancer diagnosis to the happy, healthy little boy he is today. If you aren't dealing with cancer and want to keep it that way, the show will likely be very helpful to you as well. We'll get to Craichy in just a minute, but before we do, I must disclaim to you that the information you hear on this show is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. No major announcements or big things on our mind this week, so we will get you guys right to the interview. Aside from the reminder, of course, that with all this excitement about what goes into us to fight cancer, we need to be just as excited about what goes back out of us. And our infrared sauna is one of the easiest and most relaxing ways we make sure to cover this base. It's actually the most relaxing, I can guarantee you that. And as always, if you are in the market for one, I can think of no better place to send you than to Sunlighten, where as always, if you mention us here at My Kid Cures Cancer, you will get $150 off any of their models, and that's it. With that, let's get to the interview with Craichy. Welcome back, everyone, to My Kid Cures Cancer. We have with us Craichy. Craichy, how are you?
I'm good, brother. How are you, Ryan?
Quite well. Thanks for coming on the show. I was excited to get to see and meet you at the Truth About Cancer Live event recently.
Great to meet you too, and I appreciate you doing your part to change the world as well.
Yeah. So, like I was just saying, you know, we've had we've been approaching holistic approaches to cancer from several different angles on the show, but we haven't really just dove deep into kind of superfoods, super nutrition, and how that's beneficial and the best way to get as much of it as you can, and all that good stuff. And I certainly can think of no better guy to fill that gap, especially after seeing your talk at Truth About Cancer. But so I'd want to dive into that with you. But first, I've heard your story a couple times just on how you got into this, and it's really inspiring. I was hoping you could just kind of give us the bird's eye view of how you got to be doing everything you're doing today, and what exactly it is you're doing today.
Okay, we can go in that easily. Yeah. So I usually start the story with, I met the girl of my dreams. She was Miss Florida at the time, and then she competed. She had competed at Miss America and won the town award playing classical piano. And then she came back and she crossed over and won the Miss Florida USA pageant, and then went to Miss USA and got third runner-up and first in swimsuit. So I'm telling you that because she's a magnificent woman. And so this woman who I met became my wife, and I was living the dream for sure. And so we were married for a couple of years, had one kid, and all of a sudden, this fearless woman who would go anywhere, accomplish anything she wanted to accomplish, was racked with fear and clinical depression, including suicidal thoughts. It was the opposite of who she really was. And we went to the family doctor, and I didn't know what the stuff I know now. My approach to nutrition before was, hey, what kind of nutrition can I take to be as fit as I can be? And that was my nutrition background. But I was in the medical business. I was the CEO of a medical device company, so I'm familiar with research, but not in the level of nutrition or clinical nutrition. So I went to the doctor, and the doctor basically said, hey, you have this thing, it's called anxiety disorder. It includes clinical depression. And she literally handed me a book. It's called Anxiety Disorder. It's like they're just now discovering this thing. And so we asked every question we asked, the answer was, I don't know. I don't know. And then they said if you put her on Xanax and Zoloft and psychotherapy, and my question is, like a seemingly a reasonable one. It's like, how long is she going to have to be on these drugs? We don't know. She might just have to continue taking them, but she can live a normal life. And so their answer was, there's this new disorder. It's now a disease. We're going to prescribe drugs and psychotherapy, and we don't really know how it's going to work, and we don't know how long you're going to have to take it, and we don't really know any answers to any of your questions, but do it anyway. And so this is how we left the doctor's office. I mean, a lot of people watching right now are thinking, oh my gosh, I heard the same exact thing. Even today, this is all these years later. And so within a couple of weeks, Monica already decided this is not working for me. I feel zoned out all the time. No highs, no lows, and sitting on the couch talking to some guy, it really makes no sense to me whatsoever. And so at that point, made a decision. She was going to dive in the literature, or I was going to dive in the literature. I wasn't coming out without an answer. And so I left the medical device company I was CEO of. I became chairman, hired my replacement, and I set on a quest to solve this problem, to figure out what the problem is. So through a 10-year period of research and trial and error, and meeting some of the top doctors in the world, top nutritionists in the world, interviewing them, talking to them, having her do blood tests with them, getting all kinds of supplements prescribed, it came up over and over again that there were literally 7 things that kept coming up in different ways in the literature that were profound. And there were studies on them, and they had profound effect on human health. And these things are hydration and nutrition and exercise and stress and sleep and environmental hazards and meditation and prayer. And so when you start realizing that each of these have clinically validated effects on human physiology, that it's absolutely amazing. So initially I thought, hey, it's going to be nutrition, and clinical nutrition will get all the way there. And that's where we focused, and we did make great progress that way. But when we started saying, you know what, you need to drink more water. You really don't think about water at all. And so we start, in retrospect, looking at her situation in all those 7 areas. And right now, people watching, I will assure you, based on just my limited experience in the last couple of decades in this area, that they are 4 out of 7 people are deficient in. And 1 of them causes physiologic consequences. And so in retrospect, Monica was deficient in all 7. And so we realized her hydration was poor. She was demand feeding a baby, which required more hydration. She didn't really think of eating, but when she did eat, it wasn't anything worthy of nutrition. And you start looking at how much her stress levels were. She had a little baby, and she was not sleeping through the night. And anybody says, "Hey, I slept like a baby," don't either didn't have a baby, or doesn't realize that means 2-3 hours at a time, right? So we start realizing that all these things have a taxing effect on you, and when you put them all together, it is a big time problem. And so as we got these things figured out, Monica overcame the situation and hadn't had drugs for these things in over 20 years now. So we've been able to help thousands of people overcome their own health situations as a result. Interestingly, what we discovered did not only apply to anxiety and panic and depression and all those things. It applies to basically every subset of disease you can imagine, and also applies to human performance. So I'm on the board of certain, leading edge human performance institutes. I talk to doctors, as you see, on cancer, on fibromyalgia, on all kinds of different disease, because the answer is the same no matter what the question is, essentially. And so we've been able to help so many people overcome their health situation that it's still amazing to me how overlooked these areas really are in people's health.
Yeah, it's I'm glad you mentioned that at the end. That was going to be my next point. Is I've been geeking out on cancer for the past few years for personal reasons, but you hear about pretty much everything else along the way when you get into researching the holistic or natural side of things, whatever you want to call it. And you can swap out the disease pretty easy. It seems like obviously there's the finer points that you need to know about if you really want to get into it, but just the basics of what you really need to be focusing on. It's amazing the crossover.
It is amazing, and the thing is with cancer, unfortunately, most people die from the way they treated the problem and not the problem itself. And it's a pretty sad scenario. Like chemotherapy, it is a fact it causes cancer. Okay, so what the doctor is saying, that's saying to you, hey, I want to do chemotherapy, is, hey, I want to save you from your current situation, but it's going to kill you later. And that's what he's saying to the patient. And it's a pretty sad scenario. When it won't be long from now, chemotherapy will be looked upon as one of those barbaric procedures like lobotomy that we just don't do anymore. And so will antibiotics and several other things. So it's just that the thing about practicing medicine, they haven't got it right. See, there's no seeking truth in medicine. They're seeking the next, quote, standard of care that we can all practice, that will have that we can at least feel like we're doing something for the patient, but they can't sue us because we're all doing it. And so when you talk about allopathic medicine, it is the only practice that doesn't recognize the innate intelligence in the body itself to heal itself. And so our job should be, how do we help the body heal itself, not how do we heal the body? And that's a profound difference. And unfortunately, politics gets involved. And over about 100 years ago, allopathic medicine got legislated into primary status in medicine. And that's where it all started coming unglued, because the homeopaths and naturopaths and the doctors of oriental medicine, the doctors of osteopathy back then were real doctors. And so when you think about all these Ayurvedic medicine, all these forms that have been successful because they recognize the body is an intelligent thing that can heal itself, and you just got to get out of the way of the healing and give the body the things it needs to bring about healing. And so when I talk to people about cancer prevention, like at TTAC, at the Truth About Cancer Live, our talk was about superfood nutrition for cancer prevention. It seems like a simple title. Okay, eat these and you won't have cancer. But it really goes a little deeper than that, because in American society, we're talking about a lifestyle here. I don't want to give anybody a diet. Okay, I want to give somebody a lifestyle. Once you know truth, you should be willing to do it. See, the Bible says that you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. See, it isn't the truth that makes you free. It's knowing the truth that makes you free. And so you can get hit with truth all day long. If you don't know it, it's not going to help you. So here we are. You first got to look at, what am I doing that's magnifying my cancer risk? Or if I have cancer, what am I doing that's continuing to perpetuate the metabolic disorder that I have? And so there's a list of things that so many people are doing that is truly a lifestyle problem and not a cancer problem. And people go, well, my dad had cancer and his dad had cancer and this kind of cancer, or my mom had it. you got to say, truthfully, you didn't inherit your mom's cancer. You inherited her cookbook. You inherited her lifestyle. And that sounds, I'm not trying to make light of it, but it's really true that even with a genetic predisposition towards cancer, you still, through positive lifestyle, through epigenetics, can reverse the potential of cancer, or you can reverse cancer or keep it from coming in the first place. And so the first question is, what are we doing that can magnify our cancer risk? Well, let's just say by 1,000% or more, people are magnifying their cancer risk by doing a bunch of stupid things. Now, the top of the list of stupid things would be cigarettes and drugs and alcohol. Okay? People say alcohol. Well, alcohol, there's studies that show alcohol can make you better and reduce heart disease and whatever. Okay, well, let's talk about what the studies really say. Because last month in Life Extension Magazine, it was published that 750,000 new cancers a year are the direct result of alcohol consumption. 750,000 cancers a year. 350,000 cancer deaths are directly related to alcohol consumption. So people want to say alcohol is good for me. You tell me you want to drink red wine because it has resveratrol in it. I'll tell you just take resveratrol.
Grapes are pretty good for it too. Yeah.
We're really good at justifying our behaviors. We're really good at justifying our behaviors. You still with me?
Yeah.
I got a little flash on the screen. So it's easy to justify your behavior is that, hey, I really want to do this, and that study says it's good. So food and things that we do are a double-edged sword. You can find benefit in a lot of things, but there's also oftentimes consequence that outweighs the benefit. So the Bible also says all things are permissible, but not all things are profitable. So you got to really, again, continue to search for truth. So if you are eating burnt meat on a daily basis, you have magnified your cancer risk. So if you order your meat well done, you have magnified your cancer risk. Particularly, there's so many people that think that potatoes is a vegetable. So meat and potatoes does not equal quenching acrylamides or other carcinogenic aspects of burnt meat. So if you're eating a plate of vegetables, particularly leafy vegetables and bright colored vegetables, and you're eating burnt meat, you have offset a lot of the negative consequences of that. But eating burnt meat twice in the same day or every day, that starts to get to be a problem. So those are little things like do you eat deli meats? Do you eat bacon? We know that to magnify your cancer risk by eating those kinds of sausage, you magnify your cancer risk. I mean, the biggest of all is sugar. You talked about sugar earlier. Sugar is the preferred fuel of cancer. And you even hear oncologists discount, none of that, they give you ice cream in the cancer center. So when you think about, do they really believe that to be true? Well, it was published again in Life Extension Magazine, October, last edition. I encourage you to pick it up because it lays out truth that has now even been published in Journal of the American Medical Association, that a Harvard researcher this year found boxes in the archives and started studying the boxes of some of the top Harvard researchers in the 1960s and 1970s. They were responsible for government recommendations on eating. They were responsible to go-to people on what's good for you and what's not good for you in America, in the world at the time. And these two people, from this archive box, there was letters from the sugar industry back and forth with evidence, not I suppose it might have, evidence that the sugar company was literally paying the researchers directly, okay, to not only to lighten the negative research on sugar, but every time a study would come out saying sugar was bad for you or cause the disease, their job was to rebut it and to point people towards saturated fats as the real problem. So sugar was the problem, but they converted to saturated fats. Now, we know the truth now. Saturated fats actually are good for you, and sugar has never been good for you. So there was also clear evidence of 10 passes. When I say passes, the researchers would write a report and a conclusion. They would submit it to the sugar industry reps. They would edit it, send it back 10 different times before it was allowed to be published. And by the time it was published, it didn't even say the same thing it originally said. So there has been, and this has been also reported in Journal of the American Medical Association, but way back then, it was published, the results of the studies that were fraudulent were also published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. So it's no game here, and I'm no conspiracy theorist. This is just fact. Sugar is a toxin, and it always has been. Now, about the time that they made allopathic medicine the medicine of choice in the United States, the primary status medicine, they also, if you did a study, you would say the average sugar intake in America, let's just say the turn of the century, was approximately 5 pounds a year per person on the average. So that mom would make an apple pie, or they'd take it to the store and get a piece of candy for a treat. But since then, 100 years later, on the average, people are eating 150 pounds a year of sugar on the average, and someone is eating yours and my sugar.
Yeah.
So we think about 150 pounds. People are eating their weight in sugar on an annual basis and wondering, and the sugar industry is still saying that that's not bad for you. So when you think about what's happening here with sugar, it is a toxic substance that causes cancer, causes every disease known to man. If you think about blood sugar issues, that's like number 5 on the causes of death, diabetes. But if you really look at the causes of death before the number 5, heart disease, cancer, kidney disease, you start realizing these are diseases of high sugar and blood and insulin. So when you start thinking of it that way, you're going to have to raise the blood sugar issues up to the top even. Oh, not up to the top, up to the number 2, because we now know that the number 1 cause of death in America is the conventional medical system. So in other words, there's a lot of stuff. The concept of, hey, we are doing things that magnify cancer risk by a dramatic number. Dramatic. So the first thing to do to avoid cancer, or if you have cancer, is to stop doing the things that gave you cancer or will give you cancer. It seems logical, right? Haven't talked about superfood nutrition at all right now yet. So fast food lifestyle is a promoter of cancer. It's a fact. So when you think about, hey, I don't want to get cancer, but you still, I've had people come to me and say, hey, KC, I'll do anything you say, but I'm just not going to stop eating my sugar. I really can't help you, but I can have you take things that will reduce your cravings for sugar and that sort of thing. But the truth is, some things are worth dying for, and we get to choose what those are. And for some people, it's sugar. Some people, it's tobacco. Some people, it's other things. So get rid of the things that we know, or minimize. Have sugar as a staple in your diet, you're going to have problems. If you have it from time to time for celebrations, then it's perfectly fine. In and around workouts, it's perfectly fine. But to have it as a staple all the time, 150 pounds a year, is going to cause disease. It's just a guarantee.
So that being said, it seems like I get a different answer for each person I ask, but on the sugar and cancer connection, where do you land on just like whole food, eat an apple or something like that?
Well, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, right? So let me tell you that.
Depends on who you ask these days, yeah.
If you're eating apple juice, that is not advisable. If you eat an apple, that is advisable, okay? Because an apple juice might be several apples, but you're taking out the fiber and you're leaving the sugar. So fiber is very important for gut health and for slowing down the uptake of sugar. So yes, apples have sugar in it. And so I am like this. Eat tons of vegetables, particularly green leafy vegetables and colorful vegetables. Okay, eat tons of those, and have your papaya and your apple and your other things that have miracle substances in them. Eat them in moderation and kind of like desserts, because they have things in them that are good, but I talk about a double-edged sword. And if you are out of balance and your metabolism is screaming with some kind of disease, then you got to pull out the sugars, even if it's the fruit sugars. Now, berries are really good for you, but combining them with fiber and protein is really a good idea, because you don't just get a blast of sugar that causes a blast of insulin that causes problems in the body, right? So yes, those things are good, but let's focus on the vegetable side, the green side, even berries, as far as the fruits are concerned, because they're low glycemic, but they have tons of antioxidants. So you ask about an apple, it's interesting. There are 4 mechanisms underlying virtually every cancer. Now, some blood cancers, potentially one of them will fall off, but the other ones still apply. And when you think of these 4 things, what are they? Okay, you have inflammation. Everybody's heard of inflammation, right? And we know that there are foods that cause inflammation, sugar being primary among them, right? So if you want to reduce inflammation, you reduce the disease, or the power of the disease to progress. Now, apple will be one of those foods on the list of anti-inflammatory foods, even though it has sugar in it. Berries, of course, would be on that. Greens would be on that. So inflammation is something you hear a lot about. There's a lot of drugs out there just for inflammation, Vioxx being one of them, a COX-2 inhibitor that literally killed 50,000 people. We lost many people to Vioxx as we lost to Vietnam, but there's no outrage. But they just took it off the market. Nobody got to jail. There's penalties paid, whatever. But there was fraud in the research, and no one's done anything about it. So again, inflammation, we know it's an issue. The drug companies wouldn't be focused so heavily in that area if it wasn't an issue. So the second of the two will be oxidation. Now, oxidation, like if you cut that apple and you lay it on the table and you come back in 2 hours, the apple is brown, right? You look at the apple, it's got rust on it, right?
Yeah.
That's what happens in the human body when oxygen comes in contact with lipids, that you literally oxidize the body and you have rust essentially in there. And the body has a mechanism in order to deal with that. But as our stresses go up, the body's core mechanism for quenching antioxidants is compromised. That's why you need to take significant amounts of broad spectrum antioxidants to deal with oxidation. Oxidation is a process in cancer that is very significant. Inflammation is also. So how do you quench oxidation? You got to make sure that you're dealing with 5 classes, 5 radical classes. Not one, not just vitamin C, not just vitamin E, not just the wine bottle antioxidant or the resveratrol. You have to recognize that there are different substances that quench different oxidants. So each and every one of us are dealing at this very moment with 5 major classes of oxidants: peroxyl, hydroxyl, peroxide nitrite, superoxide ammonium, and singlet oxygen. There are 5 reactive oxygen species trying to take you out, trying to age you prematurely, trying to promote the diseases that are in you. And unless you deal with those 5, you're going to continue to have problems. See, a lot of people still will they'll do a little finger test and say, my antioxidant status is high. Well, that's only a peroxyl radical. So when you think about that test, it's just testing carotenoids. So your carotenoid levels are high. It only deals with one class of oxidants and not the other 4. So if you're using a boat analogy, you got 5 holes in the boat. You know one is plugged, but you don't know where the other 4 are, or even if there are 4 others. So you still have to deal with the other 4 classes of oxidants. And interestingly, you have a combination of fruits and vegetables that will deal with oxidation. Now, if you look at that list of foods, it's interesting that the apple is in class 1 for inflammation. It's also in the second class for oxidation. So when you think about the apple addressing 2 different things, and not just because it has antioxidants in it. See, it's not just you pull the vitamin C out of the apple and just take vitamin C and you're fine on both of those things. It's now we're starting to see that the apple has a different function. See, we have so many different aspects to our nutrition that we don't think about. We have the biochemistry of nutrition, and you have the genetics of nutrition, and you have other things also that we haven't even described yet. You have the essential nutrients, essential cofactors, conditionally essential nutrients, essential nutrients we haven't named yet, all kinds of things going on, but yet the apple still is involved in A and B, right? Inflammation, oxidation. So you go to the third one, glycation. This is what I was talking about eating burnt meats or caramelized things, because that basically is a process. I wrote this in 2005, and then when I wrote it, I said in 5 years, everybody's going to know glycation just like they do oxidation. Well, they barely know anything more about oxidation now, and no one ever heard of glycation. So glycation is technically advanced glycated end products. That means AGE, and it really is a fundamental aspect of aging. So glycation is aging. Now, how is it aging? When you see people's skin that's cross-linked, or really you can see deep wrinkles in the skin, that is a glycation process. So when the glycated end products are in the skin, basically when sugar is around all the time, let's just say they're pre-diabetic or they're just before pre-diabetic and have 100 blood sugar all the time, you have a lot of blood sugar going on in the body, and that sugar ends up caramelizing proteins in the body. Okay? So when sugar caramelizes a protein molecule, the protein molecule becomes unusable, and the body doesn't have a really good way to deal with it. So someone gets 70 years old, if they have eaten burnt meats all their lives, eaten a lot of sugar and unhealthy foods, they could literally have a third of their proteins completely glycated and unusable in their body. You see the skin looks really old. They just look so old. And this process is another fundamental process in cancers, most cancers, where it actually is it's part of the deal. But interestingly, that apple I talked about in inflammation, that also helps in oxidation, and it also helps in glycation. So
You
when
don't
you think
say.
about there are foods that deal across the spectrum of the processes that underlie the diseases which we are dealing with. And so an apple is not the only thing you need there, but if you think about the fact that it's not there just because it's vitamin C, it's there for some other reason. You see, there are different processes we're dealing with, and within the processes, there's different processes. Like within the oxidation is 5 classes. Within the glycation, there's other things going on that can be blocked by taking certain nutrients for different purposes. And then you go to the fourth underlying big four of underlying diseases. That would be angiogenesis. And angiogenesis, forget about it. Almost nobody knows about that, but the drug companies do. They have now targeted angiogenesis as a cancer therapy, and they're coming up with drugs to deal with angiogenesis. And so the top drugs they have, some of the foods are even higher in anti-angiogenic properties than the drugs that they're developing. So again, that apple that was in the inflammation and oxidation and glycation is also in the angiogenesis category. So when you learn to put foods together that are anti-big four, okay, and you start putting these foods together along with the supplements that we know are effective in the various categories and the various subcategories within the categories, then technically disease cannot progress. So when you regulate the processes underlying the disease, theoretically the disease cannot progress. So we know what we call, and I have done this since I wrote a white paper in 2000, year 2001 or 2. It was called The Four Corners of Superfood Nutrition. And when you put together these superfoods with the essential vitamins, essential minerals, essential antioxidants, essential cofactors, and all the essentials, you start putting together what we do know in the highest and best forms, and combine them with the superfoods that we know have extraordinary power. We don't always know why they have power. Now you have living fuel, which is what you and I, what brought us together to start with, is that living fuel is the most potent in all these classes of any substance that we're aware of. So if you have a food that deals with all these underlying factors, but also has the protein the body needs, because we're talking about superfood nutrition being calorie restriction with optimal nutrition, so maximum nutrient density without maximum caloric density, you then have an extraordinary and potent way to have the right nutrition to avoid disease, and also if you have disease to help support the body deal with it.
Beautiful. Excuse me. Yeah, it's amazing. Just what you said. You can take an apple and all the different things that it's doing and stuff that we don't even know it's doing, and yeah, it's just important beyond measure. So on the I don't know, on that note, on the spectrum of whole foods and cofactors and all this stuff, where do you land on, say, when we're talking about supplements, an extract or something like that, or like, you're trying to get a high dose curcumin instead of a whole food turmeric product, that sort of thing, vitamin C versus crushed up berries. Is there a place for like higher dose extract type stuff, or is it?
Absolutely, because see, again, food is a double-edged sword. If you eat 100 grams of berries, that's really a good thing. But if you eat 300 grams of berries, you could overdose on sugar, and it's just it goes beyond the benefit. But if you had 100 grams of berries, but you also had berry extracts that had 50,000 ORAC per gram or something like that, or whatever the number is, and you add it to the base berry, you then can more strategically cover the 5 classes of antioxidants and other things. Okay, and then you add vitamins and minerals and all those sort of things. So it is very important to be able to strategically use these extracts. Curcumin is terrific. Turmeric, high curcumin turmeric is terrific. So that's where if you have turmeric powder that's 95% curcuminoids, that's really where to go right now. And turmeric is anti-cancer. I mean, turmeric literally kills cancer cells. So it's something we ought to be considering. And there's ways to increase the bioavailability of turmeric. And so you can take turmeric like a lot of cultures do, and eat turmeric in your meals, that's terrific also. But it's interesting that when we talk about using the best forms of the best nutrients out there, combining with superfoods, I mean, don't you hear doctors tell you, take this with food, take your vitamins with food? You hear that from the nutritionists and the doctors. Well,
Yeah.
when you actually put them together with food in the first place, it's because we don't really know how the body works. I mean, we have a pretty good idea of how a lot of things work, but truthfully, when you put together this vast number of nutrients in the stomach or in the body at the same time, you have a symphony going on that we don't even know what all the players are. We don't know what the instruments are called. We just know that when you do this, extraordinary things happen in the body.
Yeah, yeah, they sure do. On the sugar note, does glycemic index slash response slash load, does that do those factors play in anywhere for you when you're evaluating things, or do you pay much attention to those?
It's very important to pay attention to those, but people are confused into thinking those are the same thing.
Yeah.
You see, and that's where the problem is. See, glycemic load and glycemic response or glycemic index are not the same thing. Glycemic index or glycemic load and glycemic response are the same thing. You see, and we talk about glycemic response. So when you talk about glycemic index, it's basically 100 grams of carbohydrate of a substance and how fast it raises blood sugar compared to white bread. So when you think of it that way, you have 100 grams of carbohydrates of white bread combined with 100 grams of watermelon carbohydrate. It's like eating 5 watermelons, okay? So you can't eat 5 watermelons. So the truth is, a watermelon is a super high glycemic index, but a very low glycemic load. Does that make sense? So it's how many, to keep the standard so they understand how it affects blood sugar, they have to use the total number of carbohydrates in a substance and ratchet that up in order, but it doesn't always equate to serving size. In fact, rarely does equate to serving size. So I'll go back to what we've talked about, the 4 corners of superfood nutrition. I talked about the four underlying factors in disease and aging. Now I'll talk about the 4 corners of superfood nutrition because this is kind of where we started. This was that started out in 2001 or 2 when I wrote the white paper, and then it became my first book in 2005. And then it is what we practice in our philosophies and our living field superfoods. All are keeping these in mind. So we know, and I don't know if you remember, I think it's the 70s or the 80s, it was the Biosphere Project. I know you're kind of young, so maybe you weren't paying attention back then. But the Biosphere Project was where Dr. Roy Wolford and UCLA gerontology people put together this project where they were going to live in this sphere and they're going to grow their own food and then have a completely sustainable lifestyle. What they found, though, is that for some reason, they weren't able to grow enough food, so they had to ration their food or abort the project. So they essentially ate half what they intended to eat, and they lost weight, but they decided to stay with it for the entire time. But what they found was some amazing physiologic and genetic changes that they were not expecting that came from reducing the amount of food that they're putting in their system. So it spawned this thing called calorie restriction. In calorie restriction, there's lots of studies on calorie restriction, but they then changed it to calorie restriction combined with optimal nutrition. So calorie restriction with optimal nutrition became the fad, but many people would just do calorie restriction, just eat their less bad food and still have benefit. So even you've seen the cookie diet. Why is the cookie diet, why did it work? Because the actual calories the guy was intaking weren't very much. It still was awful food. So when you add optimal nutrition, you have to consider optimal. Our understanding of optimal has changed over time. So back then they would just add some micronutrients in there. But over time, you realize you can actually increase the protein or the amino acids as well as all the micronutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, the amino acids, the fatty acids. You can get all of those that you could possibly need and still have very low calories, less than 1,000 calories, like, for instance, living fuel. So if you have everything your body needs and you eat way less of it, it extends life, delays disease, enhanced performance, optimized weight, mental clarity. I mean, it's basically the fountain of youth nutritionally. And there was a group that looked like concentration camp people who practiced calorie restriction early on. And the reason it wasn't catching on was because, first of all, nobody wants to be hungry. And secondly, nobody wants to look like they were in a concentration camp. So the studies became, the doctors would say, well, why is this working? So they do studies. One group would say, well, it's the antioxidant theory that we talked about, right? If you have lower amount of food, you have lower combustion, lower byproduct. Therefore, your results should be similar to calorie restriction. And they did studies that actually showed that either lower calories or higher antioxidants will give you similar results to calorie restriction. And that was fascinating. They call that the free radical theory of aging. Then there was the other group, we talked about glycemic response. They said, well, no, the reason the calorie restriction works has to be because less food, even if it's high glycemic food, if you eat half the glycemic food, you get half the glycemic response. Therefore, low glycemic diet or low sugar diet will give you similar response to low calorie. And they actually did studies and said, yep, that's true. It does do the same thing. And so then the other one was really simple. They supposed that if you gave fish oil to someone, even if they had an awful diet, that you could give a similar response to calorie restriction, and they showed that also. Giving fish oil with no dietary change actually gave similar results to calorie restriction. So there are other fats that have play an effect there too, olive oil, coconut, MCT, those sort of things. But fish oil was the most profound. So when I started to really realize this is all interesting, that's when it came to me in the year 2000 or late 1990s that you could actually combine 4 of these concepts: that you eat less food, more nutrient dense, maxed out with nutrients, including protein, reduce or increase the antioxidants, broad spectrum antioxidants, reduce the glycemic response, and then also bring in the healthy fats. And there is the most studied program ever in dietary history. If you combine those things, you have thousands of studies to back those approaches up. So this was the philosophy and the concept we did behind Living Fuel and in my best-selling books and so on. And that is what we construct everything around today. You have the 4 corners of superfood nutrition, and within that, you have the anti-inflammation, anti-oxidation, anti-glycation, anti-angiogenic, regulatory factors within the product itself. So that is a complex, I guess, explanation. I hope people get that, but I'll tell you one study in Journal of Nutrition I discovered in 2002 that really highlighted a lot of this. It was 4 groups of mice. The first group they called the all-you-can-eat group. They gave a corn-based diet. They ate anything they wanted, whenever they wanted. So they came and they fed all the time. They lived an average of 232 days, if I recall. The second group, the same amount of food, same kind of food, but they added fish oil. They lived 100 days longer than the 232-day control, approximately. The third group was the same food, but they cut the amount of the food by 40%. That's all they did, same awful food. And they lived an average of 200 days longer than the first group. The fourth group, they combined by cutting the calories by 40% and adding fish oil. They lived 400 days longer than the initial 232-day control. Profound by any measure, but this is what I'm talking about. But combining these concepts into one nutrition program is doable. In fact, we've done it, and it is profound in the effect of people's lives.
Wow. Yeah, it's I don't know what could be more convincing. Let me this is really good for nutrition and superfood and all that good stuff. You kind of closed out at TTAC with talking about just where faith and prayer come into play for you, and where does that come in on, tying it back to health? I just thought you did a really good job with that. I was hoping you might be able to take us out with a little bit of that.
That sounds great. It's interesting because I initially came at prayer and meditation from the clinical perspective because I wanted to know. I was a Christian, but I still wanted to know, and I was growing in my faith, but I wanted to know what the research said about prayer and meditation and prayer. So if you got the hydration, nutrition, the exercise, you're dealing with stress in a good way, you're sleeping well, you're minimizing your environmental hazards, you still got this piece called meditation and prayer. And the research is very clear that people who meditate live longer. They have lower stress. They sleep better. You start thinking about how each of these keys, they play into the other key in a profound way. So what became evident even in the Mantra Project at Duke University, where they literally had 2 groups of patients for cardiac surgery. One group, they put on prayer lists worldwide. They didn't tell the group, no one was told. And the other group, they didn't. And the group on the prayer list had 50% less side effects than the group not on the prayer list. And this, again, was a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. So when you think about 50%, that's clinically significant by any measure. If it was 10% more, it would have been significant. And so there's been study after study done on meditation and prayer saying that prayer is so powerful. I mean, my conclusion is that it's literally malpractice not to tell the patients, hey, dude, you know, all healing comes from above. The literature proves it. The Bible's never been disproven. In fact, personally, I've seen so many people healed who didn't do all the things right. The Lord still loves people, and he still wants to show them his goodness. And when you think about Jesus on earth, what was his ministry? He preached the kingdom, he healed the sick, he raised the dead. So cast out demons. So that's what Jesus did, and that's who he was, and that's who he is. And so we had a little boy drown in our pool. My son, one of my sons, my 8-year-old at the time, found this young boy on the bottom of our pool with his eyes wide open, looking up. Okay, lay on the bottom of our 10-foot pool. He swam down to get him, pulled him up, handed him off. This was a black boy, but he wasn't black. He was gray. He was completely limp and lifeless. And I grabbed him and I just said, no, you shall live and not die and declare the works of the Lord. And I put him in the backyard and I started, hitting his chest. And as I did, I would say the life of Jesus Christ. And I'd pray. My wife would walk around and pray, walk around and pray, walk around and pray. Forever, nothing happened. My eyes saw this little dead kid right there. But my spirit would not accept that. And so I kept praying. My wife kept praying. There was many people around just watching on, including the mom of the child, a 6-year-old boy, looking down, frozen. And after many minutes, the kid sat up and just started talking to us. By that time, the paramedics came, the police came. They told us, hey, the police said we've had 5 cases like this year, 4 dead, 1 brain dead. So the kid is awake and he's talking, but we're assuredly his lungs are full of water. He's going to have brain damage and he may still drown. We have to take him to the hospital. So they strapped him to the gurney. They took him to the hospital. And the next morning was that kid's 7th birthday. And on his 7th birthday, they released him with a clean bill of health and not a thing wrong with him. He was completely healed. And whenever I've told this story, when I've ministered at churches or talked in public, people come to the Lord Jesus because this is not some faraway God who doesn't care about what's going on. This is a God, if you believe what he says by the stripes of Jesus, we were healed. He said he sent his word and he healed us. In John, it says his word, in the beginning, the word was with God and the word was God. So I've transitioned to another story real quick. My niece, Chassie, she was at Moffitt Cancer Center, stage 4 cancer. They finally said, hey, there's nothing else we can do. Go home and get your affairs in order. She came to church and she said during praise and worship, she felt the power of God hit her. And then we prayed for her. And she then said, okay, what do I need to do nutritionally? And I told her basically what I'm telling you guys. This is what you do. This is how you do it. And so for 2.5 years, she said she did exactly what I said. She went back to Moffitt Cancer right away. They said not a shred of cancer, not any evidence of cancer now or before in your body. So she was completely healed. She said a couple years later that she had a lump appear again and she had to have it surgically removed. She said she then went back to what we told her initially because she had left after 2.5 years. What we told her went back to what she'd been doing, and she got what she had gotten originally. So she went back to doing what we say, and this is 5 years later. She hasn't had any cancer whatsoever. And her message is, guys, yes, God heals, but he also expects us to be good stewards of what he's given us. So it isn't the truth that sets us free. It's knowing the truth that sets you free. And just because you get saved because you're drowning doesn't mean you're not going to drown again. So I'm telling you, as much as I'm sitting here, even at the truth about cancer that you saw, you witnessed, there were so many people in a prayer line for us to pray for them. And so many people got healed. And I got all these testimonies because the Lord healed them. That doesn't mean you don't go back to eat at McDonald's and have a fast food lifestyle. We know that meatitarianism is not healthy and veganism is not healthy. So somewhere in the middle is a healthy diet. And that's what we talk about. That's what we teach. And many people are being set free.
It's very powerful. I really enjoyed hearing you talk about that at TTAC, and I just feel like that is probably the most overlooked, underutilized, whatever you want to call it, tenet of healing, even in the natural space today. And I'm glad you could fill us in on that. That's for sure.
That's awesome. Well, it's a privilege because when you think about you have the cure for cancer. You want everybody to know it. Well, it doesn't really matter what the question is. The answer really is Jesus. And I can teach you all these things because everything I'm telling you is consistent with Bible nutrition. And there's a lot in the Bible about nutrition. But the truth of it is that if you go find the source, all things are possible through Christ who strengthens you. So I just want to tell everybody watching that no matter what your situation is right now, no matter what you're going through right now, there is hope. And as long as you can hold on to hope and try to see what's in the future, you have not lost the game, not lost the battle.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Case, you kind of answered my second one, but we'll see. There's two questions I ask everyone at the end of every interview. The first one is, if you had to boil everything you knew down into 3 golden rules, you have the golden keys. There's 7 of them, so maybe I have to condense them even more. And those golden rules would be keeping you healthy and disease-free, or becoming healthy and disease-free. What would those rules be?
Okay. Number 1, stop doing the things that are causing the problem. Number 2, do the things that reduce the probability of the problem that we just told you about. Number 3, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all the things you need will be added to you.
I love it. I love it. And lastly, you just kind of did, but if you just have any kind of final thought or sentiment for anyone going through cancer right now, either for themselves or a loved one, that'd be a good way to take it out.
Well, sadly, conventional approach to cancer results in death. It is, if you go into a situation and you ask a doctor, and he can't answer this question because of HIPAA laws, but if you ask the doctor, how many people came into your office in my situation and left healed, never having to deal with it again, the answer, unfortunately, is 0. So if you know you're going into a situation where there's been no success in the past, then go into situations where there has been success. It seems only logical, but see, the industry deals in fear, and fear is not the Lord. When you talk about there's hope out there, there are people practicing every day and reversing cancer, people reversing cancer on their own, people being healed from cancer, but not in your conventional medicine oncology approach. So that's not the way it happens. So if I can close with a prayer, I'd love to do that.
Beautiful.
In Ephesians 1 and Ephesians 3, it says, may the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, give to you a spirit of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of him. May the eyes of your understanding be enlightened, that you will know what is the hope of his calling, what are the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints, and what is the surpassing greatness of his power towards you who believe. I pray he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with might by his Spirit in your inner man, that Christ may dwell in your heart through faith, and that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to understand with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of God that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to all the fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all you could ask or think, according to his power that works within you, to him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful. Thank you, Casey. Yeah, we'll be sure to link to Living Fuel and and the article associated with this interview. Is there anything else you'd like to direct everyone's attention to before we go?
Just remind you, with Christ, all things are possible.
Wonderful. Casey, thank you. Thanks so much for coming on.
God bless you, brother. So nice to be here.
There you go, everyone. If that doesn't make you look at your food as potential anti-cancer fuel, then I just don't know what will. I really hope you got something out of this episode with Casey Craichy. If you did, we would be so honored if you shared it with just one person that needs to hear it. You would be doing the world a huge service by getting this information to those that need it. I literally begged my Uber driver when I was out of town for work last week, whose wife had just been diagnosed with breast cancer, to listen to this show, because that's what it's here for, is helping people that need it, but we need the people that need it to know about it. Now Sean and his wife know, your turn to go out and tell somebody. The highlight article, YouTube video, and podcast download can all be found for this episode at mykidcurescancer.com/KC-Craichy. Craichy is spelled Craychy. While you're there, be sure to pick up our Healthy Home Checklist, and you can start addressing those environmental toxins, which is another one of KC's 7 golden keys to health. And it's a really, really big one for us, because at the end of the day, you can't have a healthy body if you live in a sick home. It's as simple as that. And that can always be found at mykidcurescancer.com/healthy-home. home. And lastly, if you not only got something out of this episode, but this show as a whole, this is a friendly reminder that this is brought to you by listeners and viewers just like yourself who consider this information worth a small monthly contribution in an amount of their choosing. If you want to be part of something really special and help us take everything we're doing to the next level, you can always do so at mykidcurescancer.com/crowd sponsor. Crowd sponsor is all one word, and we are so grateful to those of you already supporting us. There really are no words. Lord willing, we'll see you next week with longtime cancer healer Judy Seeger, where we'll be talking about detox, both physical and emotional, so be sure to come back for that one. Music, as always, was provided by the Fat Rat and the Tasty Network, and all editing was done by the best wife and partner in this health crusade I could possibly ask for, Teddy Sternagel. If you're going through cancer, just keep going. This is Ryan Sternagel signing out for now. God bless and Godspeed.